Aloha, this is Dr. Steve, and we're going to take a look at Chapter 9 on forms in the Web Development and Design Foundations with HTML5 textbook. Now, there's a lot going on with forms, people, so hold on, this may be a bit of a long lecture here. By the end of today's lecture, you should be able to describe common uses of forms, create forms that provide additional accessibility features, associate form controls and groups, create custom image buttons, and use the button element. We can use style sheets to style a form, configure HTML5 form controls, and we can describe features and common uses of server-side processing, invoke server-side processing to handle form data, and even find free server-side processing resources on the web. All right, let's get going here. So, let's general overview of forms. Forms are used all over the web, right? You run into them all the time, and it's one way of doing kind of interactivity, right? It accepts information, and instead of being push its information to the user, you're actually also pulling information from the user. You can have search forms, order forms, newsletter sign-up forms, survey forms, add to cart forms, and so on. There's a whole bunch of reasons why we use forms. So form is an HTML element that contains and organizes stuff. And stuff inside there, they're called form controls, such as text boxes, check boxes, and buttons that accept information from website visitors, okay, your typical user. So, two basic components of using forms: the HTML form, the web user interface, and the server-side processing. Now we're going to be focusing mostly on number 1 in this class. Server-side processing is done in another class, but we'll kind of touch upon it. So some different types of elements. You have text areas. You see this a lot. This often configures a little scrolling text box. Most of these things are container tags. Then you have input, a very common thing. It configures a variety of form elements, including text boxes, radio buttons, check boxes, other buttons. It is a standalone tag, so it's an empty tag. And of course, the form tag itself, which everything goes inside of, and it is also a container tag. And then you have things like select boxes, that's a container tag. Options, very similar, a container tag. Okay, let's take a look at a real simple one here. So here we go. Here's form. You see there's a beginning form and end form, and then inside of that, you have to have some fields, something. Here you have the words email, and then you see the HTML here. Less than symbol, input, type equals text, name equals email, ID equals email, end quote, greater than, and you have a break, input type submit, input type reset, and then the end of the form. All we're doing here is collecting someone's email. Okay, so here we have a couple things. One, you notice that within every form, you should have at the end a submit and reset button. Okay, submit does the action of the form. It'll submit the form. Reset clears all the fields in case the user wants to start over again because of a mistake. Then on that input type, the first one you see, we have text, the name, email, the ID, email. Now here's an important concept here: type, text. Now this is basically telling the form, and then again, this form will most likely be sent to a database, and you want to have the fields in the database correspond correctly to the same fields in your form, and that type helps do that. So you're setting the type of data that the database expects. So that's important. In this case, you want just text. Okay, so the form element itself, that form tag. You would have an action that specifies the server-side program or script that will process the form data. The method, usually you're going to have a get or a post. Get is the default value. If you don't say anything, the form data is passed in the URL. That is at the top of the URL bar, right? You see it's actually passed right in there. The post is a little bit more secure. I would recommend this over GET for most instances, and it's passed in the HTTP entity body. The form tag also should have a name and an ID. They're kind of redundant, but you know that already. Okay, I mentioned the input box, a lot of different types of things in the input box. You have different attributes like text, you can have name, ID, size, max length, and value. We're going to come back to that max length in a second here. Text area, we talk about that as a container. You see beginning text area, end text area. It creates this kind of a scrolling box, name, ID, columns, and rows. And again, yeah, there should be a size or length element you can put in there as well, an attribute you can put in there as well. Now the input, this is what's, you see it down at the very end, this is the action that, it triggers the action or method of the form tag. So it'll send the form data to wherever it is you tell it to go. Okay, at the very end, again, you probably, if you just want to send it, you're going to use a submit, name, ID, and value. The value is just going to be whatever shows up in that little button. Then you have the reset, which just clears every field. An input password. Like the other input I mentioned, it has different attributes. If you put password, it's going to put in just asterisks, so the guy next to you can't see what's going on. Name, ID, size, and max length. Now, anytime you have a field that's open like this, you want to set the max length so that somebody cannot put in large amounts of code that could create some sort of a buffer overflow or create any kind of a hassle. Always put that in. That is a real kind of basic security you need to include in all fields, well, in all input fields. Checkbox. You've seen these before. Has name, ID, checked, whether it's checked initially or not, the value, what information is passed forward. Each checkbox is a separate item. So you're going to have each one for Internet Explorer, one for Firefox, one for Opera. And then you have other types of inputs, including your radio buttons. Radio buttons operate differently. You have just one radio button grouping. So here you have an example of Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Opera. A person can only check one of those three. The checkboxes, they can check all of them if they like. Difference between the radio and the checkbox. You can also have hidden data form, things that don't show to the user, but which are doing something in the background, usually some sort of processing, often for client-side or server-side scripting. Select lists, again, the container tag, there are several different types. You have select box, drop-down list, drop-down box, option boxes, all pretty much same thing. Select list, you can see here, probably the first item you put down is some directions, like here it says select your favorite browser, and then after that, the actual options you want the user to choose from. Then you have the option box, there we go, same idea. Okay, so at this point you should be able to answer these kinds of questions, some scenarios, be able to give advice to somebody as to whether how many boxes they should have, whether first name and last name should be separated or not. Okay. Another scenario might be you have 10 possible responses. What kind of inputs do you provide? Should it be a radio button? Think about these things. And you can maybe talk about it a little bit. Okay, well, let's move on. Input image button. Okay, so besides the ones you saw down at the bottom of the screen for the submit and reset, those are kind of automatic buttons. You can also have customized buttons. Does basically the same thing or not, depending upon what you want it to do. And you can, as long as you have the image, it'll in the source, you can tell the source, the SRC, it can do exactly the same thing. You have to create the button or find the button. Here you see a login button. And again, we just use the button element container tag. Button elements would have attributes like submit, reset, or button. The value or could be again what gets sent forward. Accessibility. Everybody should be able to use your forms, so you should be using labels, field sets to group elements, legends to help people screen readers read the elements, a tab index attribute, access key attribute that allows people who use the tab key to make their way through the form as well. Label elements, this associates the text label with a form control. Notice an example here, the label element bookends the entire input type, or the input tag, and makes it easier for, again, the screen readers to make sense of all this stuff. Field set and legends, it creates a little line that goes around a grouping. Here you see the grouping is around customer information. You can have several field sets. I think field sets are a very good way of organizing your different fields and inputs. I highly recommend them. And you can add various information into the legend there of the field set. Here's an example. Here's field set, beginning and field set at the end. Towards the top, you see the legend. It says customer information. Should look kind of familiar. And then your various input tags as well, and labels. Let us not forget those. Tab index. This allows a user to just tab through everything. That can be different than how you created them. So you might want to, especially if you have like a couple of columns, you want the user to go through the different fields in a certain order. You have to tell the form what the order is. You do that through the tab index, 1 through however many fields you have. Access key. This is kind of a hot key kind of thing. It'll allow you to focus on a particular field. Okay, at this point, you should be able to understand the purpose of the field set and legend, understand the purpose of the access key. And when designing a form, you should be able to know how to create a standard submit button or another image button or a button tag. All these things are a little bit different, and you should be able to understand these things, okay? Now that we have the form, we have to style it, of course. Now, the earlier examples, things were kind of, a mismatch and were not balanced well at all. If you look at this kind of wireframe here, the form on the left side, you see you have a label, then a text box, and see how everything is kind of lined up. That makes it look a little bit neater. I like that. I think that's easier for people to read. And you can do that kind of thing pretty simply by using floats and margins, that sort of thing. Look at the example of the text there in the form, label, input, and even my submit ID. It'll create something like the bottom screenshot right here. Okay. Now, server-side process. Now that you have this nice, looking form, you have to get it, send it someplace, and do something with it. That's the main thing. Do something with it. That usually requires server processing. Okay. One of the most common things, the oldest thing, is called a CGI, Common Gateway Interface, often written in languages like Perl or even PHP for all that matters. Just a server-side processing language. It could be, again, I mentioned PHP, ASP, CFM, which is Cold Fusion, JSP or ASPX. All of these are different file types and different server-side processing possibilities. Here are the basic steps. The web page invokes the server-side processing. Web server executes the server-side script. Server-side script accesses the requested database, file, or process. Then the web server returns to the web page with requested information or confirmation of action. And then the admin of the server usually can take a look at that database and do something with that data, either add you to the subscription or process your order, something like that. So common uses of server-side scripting is that you search a database, you place an order, you send a web page to a friend, you subscribe to a newsletter. All these really common. You can use the one from the textbook here for this class. That's right here on this slide, webdevbasics.net. This will echo back the information that's in the different fields. If you have no other means to or access to server-side processing, use this. That's fine. Just use this, and we are okay for this class. Now, there are lots of sources of free server-side processing that you can use. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can go to FormBuddy, Responsomatic, Master, FormMail, any number of places. This is by no means inclusive of everything. There's a lot of possibilities. There are lots of different technologies I mentioned earlier: Java Server Pages, ColdFusion, PHP, Ruby on Rails, .NET, and so on. So at this point, you should be able to describe at least server-side processing, describe why communication is needed between the developer of a server-side script and the web page designer. So front end and back end, basically. Here's a very simple kind of HTML5. So this kind of is a new thing from HTML5 form field type, and that's the email type. Email does a couple things. You see, if you don't do it right, it gives you a little, I don't know, pop-up that says, please enter an email address. What do you think it does, or what's it looking for? It's looking for that @ sign, right? Morris@email.com, whatever. And again, you want to set max length because you don't want to leave that kind of thing open for any number of text. Telephone number, same thing. Now this one's looking for a number, right? Again, set the max length. It's looking for a number. If it gets letters, it's going to say, well, I don't know what that is. Same thing works true with a URL. It's going to be looking for the http:// search box. Same thing. You can do a search. Again, these are different attributes I've listed here. Your data list looks similar to the select list we talked about earlier. The options, pretty much the same thing. Slider controls. I've never been a particular fan of, but some people are, so I can't tell what number is being selected. Okay, you can see here, you don't know what the number is there. Doesn't help me much. Spinner controls a little bit better. You're just clicking the up or down button, increasing the number or decreasing the number. Calendar controls, pretty cool. You can pass on a date. That's nice. And it looks good. And doesn't require much coding. Color, again, you can pass on colors. You can even use that color control to change the color of the web page or form background or whatever. You can play with it. It's kind of fun. Okay, well, that wasn't too bad, was it? I hope you've learned a little bit about forms. Please, now we're going to go through those files in the student data files, and of course, don't forget, read the chapter, look through all the additional information. That's about it, guys. Aloha.